So it's the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, everybody, today. Thank you all for joining us this morning, early afternoon here. My name is Meg Mason. I'm Senior Director of Marketing here at HydroPoint, and welcome to our Smart Water Management webinar series. Should you have any questions at all during the webinar, go ahead and ask them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Under questions, go ahead and ask those towards the end of the webinar. And I'd like to just get us started. I'll first introduce Ben Slick. He's our SVP of Business Development here at HydroPoint. So Ben, take it over.
Thank you, Meg. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining for another episode of our Smart Water Management Wednesdays. These have ranged in topics, for those of you new to this, from smart tips and tricks to how to use WeatherTrack. And then in the last couple of weeks, we've been going into more thought leadership with some customers who talk about how they use smart irrigation to better serve their client portfolios. And I'm especially glad this morning to welcome Paul Bassett of Water Savers LLC, which is a division of EnvoCore. Paul has been in this industry for a very long time. He's co-founder of Water Savers. He's got over 30 years of experience in smart water management, in irrigation system design, and in managing and scoping irrigation systems for retrofit. He also does operation and management of systems once they've been commissioned. So he's got a broad portfolio of work he does. His customers are primarily energy service performance companies, or commonly known as ESCOs. And so this morning's session is going to focus a lot on how Paul serves and supports that kind of customer. Paul is a resident of Maryland. He's a constant sailor. He's navigating the Chesapeake Bay with his family and friends when he can, and he's a proud grandfather of his first grandson. So with that, I want to welcome Paul. And Paul, let's go into introducing yourself to the audience, please.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it very much. Well, as you guys can see here, there's an image here of Washington, D.C., which is where I sort of live and breathe majority of my work. I was grateful enough at one point in my career to work on the first ever lead for existing buildings, which really set the roots of my path and my career into water conservation. I was fortunate enough to be the irrigation technician when Johnson Controls project manager came to me and handed me this giant book and said, "We need to make this building green." I said, "What? Green building? What is that?" This is in the early 90s. And as you can see, it's fortunate enough from that point on, Washington, D.C. has become the mecca of LEED and green buildings. And I have been fortunate enough to be able to be in the mix and mingle of all of this leadership of green buildings. And that's really how I've been able to do a lot of the work we do, is because of this platform.
So with that, Paul, tell us a little bit more about Water Savers LLC and EnvoCore as a business.
Well, EnvoCore, the team, the basis of the team was founded back in '93 by some very smart contractors who got into the lighting business. And they were the first guys and gals to get into the performance contracting before it was even performance contracting. So they were the ones that set the groundwork for performance contracting, again, started in the lighting. And then as the business started to develop, the ESCO folks were asking them to get into more of the elements in the energy conservation measures. And that's when we got involved, and we started Water Savers with the folks in LRI here in Maryland. Myself, Francis Wheeler, Eric Elam, and I were able to tie our hitch to these very successful folks.
So what is energy service performance contracting?
Energy service performance contracting, really the basis of it is you have a mechanism that you can upgrade a facility by using the future savings that are achieved in the measures that you provide. So you ideally you get paid or you earn money by what you save in the utility bill. I know a lot of the verbiage around the ESCOs and energy. As you can see here in some of these elements, I add water into it because water is where I live and breathe, but it's the basis of it is behind energy. But as water is becoming more expensive and rarity, they're starting to include a lot more water conservation measures into the performance contracting process.
Okay. So essentially an ESCO goes to a customer and says, you've got things that consume energy, mechanical equipment, lighting, irrigation. Let us count those things that generate BTUs or kilowatt hours or K-gallons, and then let us recommend improved energy efficient equipment or processes to reduce your water or energy footprint. And then in the end, what we'll do is we'll help finance that, and we'll actually guarantee a result. And so as part of their water infrastructure, you are critical in many cases to helping them understand how to create a baseline and how to guarantee a water measure for an ESCO project. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the benefit too that we are able to do with our customers is they engage us early on in the process. Once they've been selected by the end user, the ESCO, to start developing the measures, a lot of times they bring us in to help design the ECMs or facility installation measures, so that they can understand what they're spending their money on, how they're spending it, and what measure that they can include that's going to have a particular return on the investment. And there's usually always some level of threshold of a return on investment. In the federal government, it's typically 25 years. In the MUSH market and municipality market, it could be 10 to 15 years, again, depending on the contract that the ESCO agrees to with the particular end user. So that's how we help out. We get involved early, and then hopefully we're fortunate enough to win the bid as not always the lowest bidder, but the most qualified bidder. And at the end of the day, we want to also be able to implement the measures with the ESCO.
Right. So give us an example of some of the ESCO customers or firms that you work with.
Well, as I mentioned, I was fortunate enough early on in my career to work with Johnson Controls on my first ever project. So we're still working with them today. Siemens, Ameresco, Noresco, McKinstry, Clark Energy. So there's lots of different ESCOs that play in different vertical markets. You have the federal market, the MUSH market. So there's a lot of ESCOs that play in a lot of the different markets that we use. So we're one of their super subcontractors, as we would say.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about water efficiency measures as part of ESCO projects.
Well, as we mentioned before, my core competency that I started out in was in irrigation. 30 years ago, I started in the trenches as a laborer, digging in pipe and putting in sprinklers and installing controllers. And then as we were able to develop and understand more and more of the water usage, we were able to sort of encompass the holistic water consumption within a facility. And we broaden our horizon, especially with the partnership that we've had with a lot of different folks that work with us. And we understand now where all the water is going. So irrigation is my basis, but you can see on the screen, there's a lot of devices that use water in different building and facilities types. So wherever there's water going, we try to identify that usage and do what we can to reduce it, but still maintain mission within that facility.
Yeah, I mean, we both have learned and grown together in this industry. I met you 15 years ago where I was new to HydroPoint. I came from Silicon Valley Tech. You came from the irrigation specific piece, but look at you go. I mean, look at all the different things you get involved with now with Water Savers and EnvoCore. I mean, so it's a pretty broad set of use cases for how people use, manage, save water. So let's narrow ourselves again into some of the customers that you've worked with and some of the solutions you've implemented for those.
Well, the vertical markets that we serve, as you see here, the federal is a very big market because the federal government owns and manages more square footage than any other entity on the planet. And they have these facilities all over the world, especially military bases and State Department buildings. The Veteran Administration has lots of hospitals that we assist in. And then, the MUSH market as well as a big part of the business with the municipalities and the cities, and then the universities. And then we also look at a lot right now, especially this time of the year, the K through 12 market, especially with the pandemic going on right now, that market has opened up tremendously because now we can do more work in the schools when there's not the students in there. So we're really hustling right now at this point. And then hospitals, which is the more complex users of different elements of water. And then also you can see here in this image, this particular, because of my landscape background, we were able to include a green roof. And this is the first green roof that was installed at Capitol Hill down in Washington, D.C. at the House of Representatives in an ESCO project with NORESCO. And they allowed us to be more creative based on all the water savings that we were able to achieve on the site. And they let us install this green roofs to allow the members of Congress and their constituents to open up their window, as you can see these windows, to look and overlook at a sustainable solution to stormwater in DC. And one of the elements they also allowed us to do was collect some of the rainwater off of the roof and store it, and then use that to irrigate the green roof until it got established. And this is one that we used another weather track controller to manage the water and the rainwater on this building. It's a very, very unique and interesting and challenging but fun project to do.
All right, let's dig a little deeper into some other projects that you've been associated with.
Sure. So I know that
Meg, you want to advance?
We missed
one. Let's go to the next slide for our audience.
Thank you. So on this particular one, we had mentioned, Ben, that how do we calculate water usage and potential savings in any project, ideally, but when you're dealing with a performance contract, you really got to be precise in calculating it, because you're going to be guaranteeing some level of savings, and that's not an always easy element to do. So what we need to do is we need to balance the water consumption based on the utility bill, and hopefully the utility meter and the bill are correct. But it's not just all about the irrigation. There's a lot of other water usage that are happening within the facility type, so you need to know where they're all going. And on this particular image that you're seeing here, this was a site that had a tremendous amount of irrigation consumption, so we had to really go through and analyze it effectively. We had new meters installed, so we were able to track and trend the consumption. And then in the spots where we did not have meters, we used some new technology and new tools that we were able to strap on a device and convert the meter over to automatic meter, and we were able to get the data. And data is king in performance contracting, and especially with the ESCOs, to doing the appropriate measurement and verification.
Calculating the proper baseline is everything for a performance contract. If you don't know what you're starting with, how do you even forecast savings? So you've got to really understand the use cases, the historical, water used, and then breaking it down by application like you've done here. It's a lot of analysis, a lot of work. Not everybody in the world knows how to do this. So this makes you fairly unique to do this. Not just do it, but do it right, so that you can stand up to an audit.
Well, yes,
so
that's very true. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ben.
No, please.
Well, I just want to be clear. It's not just Paul, okay? Even though we do a lot, but there's a lot of folks that contribute to our success within the team. So it's not just Paul. I just want to make note of that.
Noted for the record. Your humility is noted. Let's talk about savings. How do you go about estimating savings?
I mean, that is really the secret sauce, and we're going to share it with some folks here today. But I think we're moving to the next slide, if I'm not correct, Ben.
Yep.
Thanks, Meg. So savings, well, first of all, the initial element before you calculate savings is really, as you mentioned before, you got to have a real baseline. You can't calculate a baseline. It needs to be tried and true. And in this particular project, we were able to analyze many, many hundreds of water meters and then collect that data, crunch the numbers, and determine exactly how much water was being used in every one of these facilities. And you can see here's a pretty big facility, and this is just irrigation water. So this site in a given year is consuming what we calculated 430 million gallons. And again, we're doing this and submitting this information to the ESCO, and the ESCO has to also ensure that the data that we provide them is real and it's actionable, and they can use it to provide real performance data, and that they're going to see this information for years to come. How do we calculate it?
They're going to guarantee.
Yes, they're the ones that are holding the guarantee. Correct. Yeah. So the ESCO is the one that holds the guarantee. They have to pay back that amount of loss that they had between what they said they were going to save and what the loss was. And the only way that our company is able to find success in this business is if year over year we're proving savings. So if we don't do what we tell them we're going to do, they're not going to hire us back. So fortunately, as you can see by our history, our company's been around since 1993, and it's not because we have shiny spreadsheets. It's because year over year we're showing the savings, and that's how they hire us back again.
Yep.
So you asked, go ahead, apologize.
No. When you go to outdoor water use and you drive down to metrics, down to a square foot, of irrigated area, how do you go about that process?
Well, one of the bigger challenges with irrigation is, as you know, it's controlled by weather most of the time, at least it should be. So weather impacts how irrigation system is calculated. We try to do it based upon a 30-year average, but those averages have been thrown out the door over the last several years, as you know, because we see some climate change happening, and the norms are swinging from one side to the other. And Meg, can you go to the next slide, please? So the true matrix in an irrigation analysis for us and for my ESCO partners is we determine and evaluate how many gallons per square foot does that landscape, is it being applied? And how we do that is we measure every given area that the landscape or that the irrigation system's applying to come up with the square footage of that irrigated area. We then know, based upon either measurements of the system or metered data, how many gallons per square foot that irrigation system has applied water to. And then, based on scientific methodology using the landscape calculations, we know in that climate that this landscape really only requires this many gallons per square feet. And the delta between the two, Ben, really for us is where the savings is derived from.
Right.
And that's really the key metrics. How many gallons per square foot did the irrigation system apply? How many gallons per square foot based on weather does it need? And what's the difference between the two of them?
Yep. The thirst of the plant, the efficiency of the irrigation system, the size of the irrigable area, and ultimately the weather. How much do you get from nature? How much does nature take away? That's the reason for irrigation. So, pretty complex formulas to figure this stuff out. Getting it right is not just I can save you 20%, call it a day. You've got to really know and own the numbers to, live in your world.
It's very true.
How do you go over water billing and analytics? I think there's another slide coming up that we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that.
Yeah, and again, it's really, which is important with regards to the billing analytics, but specifically what you mentioned before in the previous slide was, how do you come up with that gallons per square foot? What is the science behind it? Luckily for me, I didn't come up with the science. There's a lot of other folks that have been analyzing irrigation water demand for many, many years. We just have adopted it, and the particular element that we use is the slide method, the simplified landscape irrigation demand estimation. So it calculates, the current irrigation season, what is the evapotranspiration rate in that given climate, how much rainfall falls, and then the math to it all is the bottom number. What is the net target gallons per square foot based upon, again, irrigation efficiency, the plant factor, everything, Ben, you and I have been studying in our entire career, and any irrigation professional, to provide. So we provide them science-based method to understand what it's going to take to irrigate, and that's how we can back up our savings numbers.
And so as a regular practice, when humans are working with mechanical time clocks and guessing how many minutes each timer should run, and rarely, if ever, making changes to them seasonally to account for temperature spikes or rainfall events, it's almost impossible not to save some amount of water unless the system has been designed to deficit irrigate for whatever reason, right? So taking science and applying it to this FIM or ECM, will definitely drive a result for you and for an ESCO.
And historically, what we've seen, I've been in the performance contract business element of this science for more than 15 years. But what happens is, when an irrigation system goes in and it's operating, what we've typically seen is that the schedule gets inputted, and it's a set it and almost forget it. And unfortunately, there's very little investment that goes into managing irrigation systems, which is it's a resource. The water is a resource. You're spending the money on it. And as we're seeing year over year, the rate of water and the cost of water is escalating tremendously. So, projects that we might have analyzed, Ben, 5 or 10 years ago that didn't really have a good return on investment because the water rates were so low, we're seeing them really start to come to fruition now because water rates have gone up 5–10% a year over the last several years. So water that cost, $5 a 1,000 gallon 10 years ago now is $15 a 1,000 gallons, and they're wasting more. So the opportunities are so much more now today as the water rates are going up.
I've noticed over time as we've worked together that a growing number of your customers are asking you to price in options for what is industry terminology, O&M, or operations and maintenance. Maybe talk a little bit about what your role is in that kind of a situation with a customer. Well, what are they looking for?
And this is true because I think what we've done is we analyzed the irrigation system, not only how it's using water, but how it's being managed. And when we put the analysis together, we put in there that the reason why the irrigation system currently is not using water the way it is because you don't have proactive management of the systems. So if you either hire folks in-house to do your proactive management or you outsource it, you're going to achieve additional savings, not only in the water consumed, but also a bigger benefit in the visual aesthetics of the landscape. So what we are seeing is some of our ESCO partners, in order to ensure that the dollars we save and the water we save in our analysis are achieved long term, the only way I personally can guarantee that savings long term is if we or someone is managing the water and the irrigation systems proactively on a daily basis. So what we're seeing is that our ESCO partners are asking us to start to manage these systems. And that way, for me, if I put a number down that I'm going to save 37%, And this way I can track and I can trend all of the consumption on the irrigation systems on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, and we can compare it against our baselines based on all the data that we can get from these control systems. So there's been a lot more movement, and we bring in on more folks to be able to manage these systems.
You've also, as part of your methodology, developed processes for determining if a site's over or underwater. Let's fast forward and take a look at a slide that helps the audience understand how you come to that determination. Meg, please advance the next slide.
Well, this wasn't the one that we were talking about, but
yeah,
these are
examples of projects you've used. So,
well, let's talk about that, Ben, because it's critical. Yeah, it's critical though on that statement you made specifically too, because a lot of times when a customer will go to an ESCO and say that we have irrigation and we're watering all different times of day and night, that doesn't always mean that they're over irrigating. I would probably have to say more than 50% of the irrigation systems that we analyze are in a deficit irrigation, especially in climates where it's very high evapotranspiration rates, where most of the times if the manager says the rotors run 30 minutes and the sprays run 10 minutes, that's not enough water in El Paso, Texas, or Livingston, California, or Denver, Colorado. They're not watering it properly. So, if they won't always fit into a performance contract. Deficit irrigation is not going to allow us to save water. Now, if they want it to be upgraded and they want better equipment and better management, then we can include it in. But a lot of the times, we're looking at deficit irrigation in half of the systems that we analyze.
Yeah.
But yeah, as this particular image shows here, these are the ones. These are the particular municipalities that we've been able to partner with the ESCOs on and deliver satisfied quality projects using WeatherTrack and their the devices.
And you've also used other technologies to accomplish these goals as well. So WeatherTrack's not your only tool. You've had great success, for example, at Fort Bliss, right?
Yeah, Fort Bliss, one of the things at that particular site with an ESCO partner of ours is that they had a very old, antiquated, circa 1960 manual irrigation system where they had to turn on the zones during the middle of the day, very inefficient. We were able to get and install a brand new irrigation system on about 70 acres of landscape, as well as we were able to remove about 12 acres of turf grass, non-functional turf grass on the parade fields to reduce the water demand as well on that particular site. And it was a very successful project. And we have the maintenance and O&M on that project for the first initial 5 years.
So everything from military installations to government buildings to schools to county government to city government. I mean, these are great opportunities. There's so much landscape to manage. Turf removal is something that has gotten a lot of play in California. There were rebates, in fact, in SoCal for pulling turf out by the acre. The rule of thumb had always been with our commercial customers, if the only contact a human being has with the turf panel is when you mow it, it's a good candidate for turf removal, right? Very
smart. Yes, agreed with that one. So we do see that, yes. Those always don't pencil in a performance contract unless the facility has some capital budget money that they want to put into it, Ben, or that they're just grossly over irrigating, that we have so much money available that we can use that to help fund that element.
Yeah. So in order to help you do your job, because you're in Maryland, but you've got a worldwide responsibility. I mean, we've got partnerships together that include Spain, controllers of ours in Spain managing airfields. Why do you choose a partner? What do you look for in deciding where to go and who to use?
One of the most critical elements of that is, for my clients, it is the measurement and verification of the application and consumption of the water, Ben, because they promise their customer that they're going to save X amount of gallons a year, and they have to prove it. It's critical to prove the data out. So having a partner, a control manufacturer that understands the business and understands the need for us to extract the data and provide the data to our customers to show them, we said we were going to save 100,000 gallons. Our control system is producing reports that say we're saving 72,000 gallons. That is really important. And ensuring that the data is real and it's not off by 1% or 10. That's what's important. And then also being able to have the ability to access this data remotely on our sites, as you mentioned, all over the world, to be able to get that information to our clients in an actionable format.
So let's advance the slide and talk about one of your more recent projects where you've been deploying.
Yeah, so I know it's kind of hard to see this on the screen. I did a screenshot here. We were fortunate enough to be selected as the awarded contractor with McKinstry for the Denver Public Schools Phase 1 project. When we did the analysis, we saw that probably a quarter or so of the schools weren't meeting ET, so we couldn't find any savings, and we found other schools that were exceeding. So overall, we were able to have a project that had savings in it, but it wasn't so much the savings. I said the school really wanted to have more control over their application of water, to be able to ensure that the landscape was being watered properly, and if and when a problem occurred with the irrigation system, that someone be notified pretty quickly. And that's one of the benefits of the control system that you have here, is that the alert dispatching of any threshold of consumption or break or alert for a electrical issue is transmitted to the manager.
So we talk about weather-based irrigation scheduling, but putting in flow sensors and master valves are just as important, if not more so, to helping ensure the sustainability of the savings that you estimate through your ET calculations, right? So let's talk about flow monitoring and leak detection.
Yeah, when we do our analysis, when we look at it for our clients, and I apologize for the, didn't realize this had movement in the screen, Ben. So we look at the irrigation system and the landscape system in 3 different formats. The first one is we look at the controls. What is the control system doing? How are they applying water? What can we do to improve that by using weather-based control systems? And then the second element is we look at the flow and master control of the irrigation system, so that now we can at least see through the flow sensor how the system's applying water, validating the consumption to ensure that we're applying the correct amount of water at the correct times, and that we don't have any problems in breaks in the sprinkler system. And then the last element that we look at is in the distribution system. What's going on out in the piping network? How are the sprinkler heads applying water? Are they applying it efficiently? Do we have the right sprinklers out there? Can we put in new ones so that we have more efficiency? So it's critical when you look at the system. Ideally, the controls are going to be critical and most important, but to validate the analysis, the flow sensors are super important. So that's a critical element, and some of the newer advances that HydroPoint has been integrating into their control system really allows us to expand upon some of the more complex sites that have multiple controllers and have multiple water supplies, and that we can manage that resource more effectively with the control system. So that's one of the reasons why we now have utilized your package, because you now have the ability to help us with the complex systems and manage them remotely.
Mm-hmm. Paul, this has been great. Before we turn this over to Q&A to the audience, because I know there's a bunch of questions that have queued up, what tips or tricks or best practices would you want to leave the audience with in terms of looking at irrigation control as a way to improve water use efficiency?
Well, some of the most important elements that we look at and that we try to ask our customers is really, we need to see the real raw water consumption data. Some of the challenges that we've seen in the past, Ben, is that if there's only a single meter on the site and there's no meter on the irrigation, there's a lot of guesswork that goes into that, whether it's the water's going to the toilets or the water's going to the cooling tower, how much really is going to the irrigation system. So the audit is everything. I mean, that is so important. And fortunately for me, I have an irrigation background. I've been doing it 30 years, and I've seen audits done where, as you mentioned before, Ben, there's just a guesstimation of savings based on the manufacturer's spec book. That's not going to go, you're not going to go to the bank with that number, I'm sorry to say. So the audit is everything when it comes to an irrigation system analysis in a performance contract world. That's my biggest tip, if you can take out of this. You got to spend the money on the audit, and you need to do it all the way down to the sprinkler heads. Just going into a controller and extracting the data, that's not how the pros do it.
Yep. With that, Meg, let's turn it over to you and the audience for questions that we can pepper Paul with to get more of his expertise.
Awesome. So just a reminder here is ask any questions you may have in the questions section of the control panel. We already have a couple questions here. First one is from Tony. Hi, Tony. After a project is complete, is your company involved in the maintenance of the system and the maintenance of the water to ensure the savings over the year?
Good question, Tony. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to say it depends upon the ESCO and the end user, because we provide pricing for that element. And if they accept our cost to do the O&M and the maintenance on it, then we do it. If they don't put it in the budget and it doesn't occur, then they either do it in-house or they have an outside contractor do it. So it depends. We would prefer it, because that way I can assure and guarantee the savings if my team and our folks are out managing the water.
Awesome.
And Paul, as part of O&M, when you have a contract for O&M, don't you also do system inspections to help the customer understand if there's been leaks or breaks in the system?
Well, part of the O&M event just depends on how we scope it and what they accept. So for instance, on these lovely images you see here, because I'm in DC, we have long-term O&M on all the irrigation systems at the National Park Service, and including in that is virtually daily inspections. We're inspecting the system every day to assure that the sprinklers are operating properly, that no contractor went out and damaged anything. We're checking on all of the flow. We get daily reports on the water usage and consumption. We're looking at how much water was used yesterday based upon today. So there's a lot that goes into effectively managing an irrigation system O&M contract. Boots on the ground every day in order to make sure they work properly.
Great. We have two questions actually from Marco, so I'll go with the first one first. Are you product agnostic?
We are product agnostic to an extent, especially in performance contracting. If EnvoCore and my company is guaranteeing savings, there's specific products that I know that are tried and true that are going to operate, and they're going to allow me to say, yeah, I'm going to put my tail on the line and saying we're going to save this water. There's other systems that I cannot say that they're going to do what I'm going to do, or that we promise that are going to do. There are a few out there, and we do analyze them, and we do look at others. But when you're dealing with performance contracting and performance guarantees, there's just a few companies that allow me to say I will guarantee it.
Makes sense. Another question, is there grant funding available to offset costs?
We typically don't get involved with grant funding when it comes to offset costs, but there are rebates that we do assist in certain jurisdictions around the country. For instance, the project at Denver Public Schools, all of the control systems qualified for the rebate that they offered. Because of COVID, though, it's a little more challenging because the municipalities are strapped for funding. So a rebate that was available at the beginning of the year might not be available now or at the end of the year. So we don't always use the rebate money in our savings pro forma, because you never know if you're going to get it or not. And right now we're at a time where municipalities are struggling just to pay the bills, and they're not going to have money available for these types of rebates. That's what I found.
Sense. Yep, absolutely makes sense. So we got one last question here. I work at a school district and have heard about ESCOs, but don't currently work with one. How would you suggest I start that conversation?
Well, fortunately enough, we work with a lot of ESCOs around the country, and we would be happy to help them find an ESCO that would fit within their needs. So they can contact me, and then we'll funnel them to the right folks.
Awesome. So I did just advance the slide, so you can see Paul's contact information on this slide, his email address and phone number there as well. So we don't have any more questions. So I did want to, swing back to you, Ben and Paul. Is there any kind of last summary words that you want to throw in here about ESCOs or the contracts?
I just want to thank Paul for taking time out of his day to help explain a fairly complicated business process, a fairly complicated topic. Did it in a way that I think was very approachable for everybody. Paul's in the business of helping understand how to measure and verify savings, and he'd be an asset to any ESCO that would look at water projects to help their customer improve their efficiency. Paul, I'll let you close us out.
Well, I do want to thank you and Meg and the HydroPoint team for bringing this to the forefront as well, because it's a critical element of the business for sure, because especially now with municipalities and agencies are going to have a struggle finding money to do anything, especially in the time of the virus. So performance contracting helps fill the gap when it comes to upgrading of the infrastructure within facilities. And we work with a lot of really good partners in the ESCO market to be able to help them fulfill their needs to upgrade their systems without capital improvement money. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul. To everyone that is on the webinar right now, we did record this, and you will be receiving a follow-up email that has a link to the recording. So feel free to view that at your leisure. Should you have any questions at all about HydroPoint and our smart water management services, feel free to visit our website at hydropoint.com or email us at info@hydropoint.com. And then just a plug for next week's other thought leadership webinar. We are meeting with Stephen from Harvest Landscape, and he's going to be talking about how he has implemented and used smart technology to scale his business. Again, there'll be a link for that webinar in the follow-up email you'll be receiving shortly. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again to Paul and Ben, of course, our fabulous host. And everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you next week.
Bye.